Big 12 Radio, it's Big 12 Today, heard on TuneIn, watched on Big 12 Studios. I am Ari Tepkin. Taman Turner is filling it today, producing and co-hosting with James out. And as our caravan rolls along here, Modelo Spring Football, earned, not given. The full-time fan knows no off-season. Spring Caravan is presented by Modelo, and we roll along in the Spring Caravan here to Utah. Where's that horn? Thank you. Morgan Scalley, the Utah head football coach, is joining us coming up in 20 minutes as we bring our Modelo Spring road trip to Salt Lake City. And, all right, so big picture spring, you start with just the whirlwind last few months it's been for Utah football. So a huge down year one for Kyle Whittingham and that Utah program with high expectations. But last year, a return to normalcy for Utah at the top of the conference, finishing third in the Big 12. But then you have the offseason where Kyle Whittingham steps down what appeared to be a situation in which his hand was forced. He goes and takes the Michigan job, and with him takes a bunch of Utah players, including All-American defensive end John Henry Daly, who had 11.5 sacks last year, highly productive freshman wideout tight end J.J. Buchanan, who had 5 touchdowns last year, starting quarterback Smith Snowden, Tao Johnson, and defensive tackle Dallas Vakalahi. Also took offensive coordinator Jason Beck, who had come over with Devin Dampier from New Mexico to Utah. So Utah will have to be replacing 9 defensive starters or rotation players that played heavy snaps, including the entire starting defensive line. So there starts with major questions on defense, and I think that's where this conversation really starts because, you know, the Utah run defense, which was one of the best in the country last year, took a little bit of a step back in the final third of the season. Plus, without John Henry Daly, who led in terms of pass rushing for Utah last year, where is the pass rush going to come from? So Morgan Scalley, the longtime defensive coordinator and coach in waiting, takes over as head coach. Colton Swan steps in as the defensive coordinator. And there's a lot of new players on defense for Colton Swan. Now, Swan has been on staff since 2019. So, you know, familiarity and consistency and continuity is everything within Utah. You know, and so a new coach takes over, but he's been there forever. And now a new defensive coordinator takes over, but he's been there forever. In terms of what they bring back, their secondary is probably the most ripe with quality players in terms of returning players. Jackson Benny, Elijah Scooby Davis, Rabbit Evans, Nate Ritchie all returned. Now, Evans and Ritchie were both lost for the season last year with major injuries. Ritchie, 25 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss before a season-ending injury. Rabbit Evans, the same in October, went down with a season-ending injury. So they both returned, plus Benny and Scooby Davis return. So at least from a secondary standpoint, they do have to replace some corners, but their safeties are back. It's the defensive line and the corners that I'm most concerned with on the defensive end. All right, so let's go to the offensive line because they also have to return. They also lose everybody on the offensive line, including 2 guys that are going to be first-round picks. You know, in Spencer Fano, and Logan. So every starter's gone. All conference tackles, Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu are both projected day 1, day 2 NFL draft picks of the worst. And then the rest of their starters were seniors. So Utah enters spring practice replacing the entire starting 5. And they bring in a new offensive line coach, Jordan Gross, who you may remember from his all-pro days of the Carolina Panthers. He's a Utah legend. So big-time hire to get the NFL legend, Jordan Gross, who's in the Carolina Panthers Ring of Honor, who is a Utah legend, coming back, you know, to coach the offensive line and to try to build on what was last year the number 1 offensive line or one of the top offensive lines in college football. It starts with a 5-star recruit. So their highest rated recruit, Utah's first ever 24/7 composite 5-star recruit, tackle Kelvin Obat. He's already bulked up to 300 pounds and figures to be competing immediately for a starting spot. So I think he's kind of the name you look at. They did bring in a ton of transfers. What's interesting is, like, in some position groups, Utah is rife with experience and talent, and other ones, it's rife with talent but not much experience. Quarterback is one of them. So, I mean, Devin Dampier, who you might have expected to transfer to Michigan with Jason Beck, with Kyle Whittingham, he stays at Utah, Bird Ficklin did too. So both Bird Ficklin, who stepped in and had a great season last year, especially running the football, along with Devin Dampier, are both back. And new OC is Kevin McGivern, who comes in from Utah State, where he had a team that averaged 409 yards a game and 31 points per game. So McGivern's scheme is very similar to Jason Beck, very motion-heavy, multiple formations, quarterback-friendly. Morgan Scalley wanted to hire an offensive coordinator that would have been similar to Jason Beck, and it feels like he's found one, but still, it's still a new offense. It's probably, new verbiage, lots of new that Devin Dampier is going to have to learn. So I think that, that cohesion, that relationship with those two is going to be hugely important. Let's hear a little bit from Morgan Scalley, because he was able to bring back Devin Dampier despite his OC from the last 2 years, Jason Beck, going with Cal Whittingham to Michigan. Here's what Morgan Scalley said about culture.
Culture is what you believe, it's how you behave, and it's the experience that's delivered by that behavior. And if that experience isn't great, people won't buy in. They'll leave. We have that type of culture here at the University of Utah. And the guys that you bring into your program, you want to make sure that they are culture guys, that they're not energy leaks or energy vampires, that these are guys that are going to add to, not subtract from. And we've got to do a really good job of continuing to evaluate. That's, in my opinion, what happens with you get these recruiting staffs, and then you put all the pressure and the responsibility on them. We as coaches have to continue to evaluate. And I've never looked at a star ranking in my life. What was a kid's star ranking? What was this? And no disrespect there. Does the film speak to me? And can I see this kid? Can I develop him? Is there a skill set there?
Yeah, love that from Morgan Scalley, and you'll hear more of similar sound bites on culture from Scalley in our interview coming up with him in about 10 minutes from now. So, I think that's a huge part of why he was able to keep Devin Dampier. Again, it looked like all the evidence was that Dampier was going to leave and bolt like many of the other Utah players, especially with his OC. Jason Beck, with Devin Dampier, transferred from New Mexico to Utah, and you'd think he'd follow suit, but instead he stayed, bought into what Morgan Scalley was selling, bought into the culture, and he's still at Utah. Kevin McGivern comes in and brings in a player with him, and that is his top wideout. And so one of the big issues for Utah within recent history has been they don't really have a legitimate number one wide receiver. Well, they may have that now, and Braden Pegan, who transfers to Utah from Utah State with McGivern. Last year, Pegan, who initially transferred from UCLA to Utah State, blew up. 60 catches, 926 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So he was a legit number one wideout for Utah State, and now he comes to Utah with a legit quarterback and an offense that he's familiar with. And when you look at Larry Simmons or Creed Whittemore, those guys are back, and it will improve their play to have a legitimate number one wideout, right? Because there's a domino effect with wide receivers. If you've got a legit one, then you could slide a legitimate number two and number three in, and those are complementary guys where the number one guy is going to take some attention from defensive coordinators. If Pegan can prove that, now all of a sudden Whittemore and Simmons and some of these other guys become that much more crucial in terms of their passing game. So Utah hasn't really had that. They've obviously been a ground and pound offense. I expect them to continue to be that way. Sean Parker's back at running back with Devin Dampier and his running abilities. I still think they're going to lean heavily on the ground game, but this is more of a legit wideout one than we've seen Utah have. And let's actually hear clip 8 now from Morgan Scalley, not 7. Let's hear 8 on the importance of culture when it comes to recruiting and the type of players he's trying to recruit.
Culture is what you believe, it's how you behave, and it's the experience that's delivered by that behavior.
Oh, sorry. 9. I meant 9. My bad. That's my fault.
And well, I would say relationships always matter. I've recruited Houston my entire career. And so those are the phone calls and the text messages that were really special. Were the high school coaches from Houston, and
they're excited for you.
That saw me as a pup, when there was only Garmin and you were trying to find your ways throughout the streets of Houston on maps and stuff like that. So they've seen me grow up and now become the head coach. And even in this day and age of portal and the recruiting window's been sped up, I think you get a lot of coaches fixated on, we got to be able to position recruit, and so they don't establish their area. and relationships. And the high school coaches miss that. They want to know that guys are going to come to their schools and see their players. And so half the phone calls I get are, hey, my guy's not happy at such and such, and I want to have him come play for you. And because they know me, they know that my logo's never changed. And there's a level of consistency, a continuity there. So relationships will always matter, and they want to know that you're a good person and that you're a man of your word. And so I think that's one of the biggest things in recruiting is you have to do a great job of hitting the schools. You can't shortcut, and make sure those coaches know who you are.
Man, I love the way Morgan Scally handles some of these questions. He's also asked about the challenges that he's facing, which are obviously very real with Whittingham leaving and taking much with him. But yet it feels like he's confident in his process, and like he answers those questions with a confidence level that I would imagine gives Utah fans confidence. Here it is.
I would say young men understanding their value. Your value isn't necessarily attached to a dollar figure. You have to be very clear about what you want. What are the young men that we want coming into our program? And if it's those men that the dollar figure is always number one, is that what we want? Versus the guys that are about the team, and that's so difficult nowadays.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it says a lot to him about the types of players that stayed. All right, as we roll along here on our Utah Spring Caravan stop, last piece is, so offensive line and defensive line are entirely new, essentially. Lance Holtzclaw and Cash Dillon each logged around 350 snaps in 25 and figure to be starting edge rushers this year. But also, Utah picked up Ethan Day out of the transfer portal, a North Texas transfer. And then PJ Taki, a late flip from BYU, who's got an amazing name. But Ethan Day, 6'4", 250-pound edge rusher out of North Texas, 53 total tackles, had 4.5 sacks in 2025. And again, PJ Taki, a guy that could factor in to that defensive tackle rotation. All right, more on Utah as our spring caravan rolls along. Morgan Scally, the head football coach of Utah, joins us next. This is Big 12 Today, and this is our Modelo Spring Football Earned, Not Given, because the full-time fan by Modelo knows no off-season. Your Spring Caravan presented by Modelo continues next with Morgan Scally. It's Big 12 Today on Big 12 Radio, presented by Modelo.